Welcome back to another episode of I'm a Software Engineer. What next? Thanks for joining me again, Matt.
Thanks for having me, James. You keep inviting me back.
Yes. How is the new place? It's been a few weeks now.
It's lovely. Apart from everything's great. Apart from the cost of the train fare to London, which is eye-watering, but everything else is 3/5 of the cost of London. So swings and roundabouts.
Balances. Yeah. I don't know if we actually mentioned, but you're in Nottingham now as
I
opposed to
I am.
London. Yeah.
I'm Nottingham. Nottingham, right on the edge of the city. It's lovely. Really nice town.
Very good. And it looks like a t-shirt we haven't seen before, but
I've
a
gone
name that we should know.
on retro. Gone back to the old Atari days. Spent too many hours playing Atari video games, both in arcades and at home. So yeah, I thought I'd do a hat tip to my misspent youth.
I like that. I will get into it. This week we are joined by Ben Moag. He's been an army officer, a quant PM at hedge fund, and a principal engineer in that order. Computer science at Bristol, then Sandhurst, then a decade in finance, central risk trading at Citi, quant portfolio management at Citi. Now he's head of engineering at InsurX, rebuilding the platform live while the business is still running on it. Ben, welcome to the pod.
Hi, thanks a lot for having me.
I hope that intro was somewhat accurate, but it might be best to give a quick brief introduction yourself as well.
Yeah, thanks. So, yeah, as you said, I guess slightly similarly to Matt, but very much a misspent youth where I couldn't quite get into a groove and everything looked shiny and exciting. I sort of jumped at, hence why I guess I left university with a computer science degree and took the next logical step of becoming a tank commander in the British Army, because that's what everyone does. But yeah, I think I sort of just really focused on trying to do interesting different things when I was young and stupid. And as you say, I sort of left the army realizing that as much as being in the army was great, my partner at the time wasn't that fussed of me being here, there and everywhere. And actually the real world and a job and sort of, as they call it in the army, civvy street was calling. So I ended up back in finance on the trading floor, and that was very, very interesting. But I sort of realized very quickly when I was there that I was the trader on the desk, but also could speak to the engineers to a certain extent because I had a computer science degree, even though I never really used it. Sort of, I guess, in anger. And that had a really interesting dynamic where ultimately, whenever the traders wanted new technology, I could just build it, which gave me a massive edge, as I'm sure you guys can imagine, because I could just build it straight off. And then from that led very quickly to a hedge fund, basically looking for, inverted commas, the next generation of trader where you could trade and program. So I ended up in a hedge fund in 2018, very briefly having left the army, where they sort of supersized that to a certain extent because I had almost unlimited resources, both with regards to like hiring talent, compute resources, and then also like, I guess, money with which to trade. So that was a pretty wild 4 years when I was there, maybe slightly longer. And then I did what every portfolio manager does at some point, which is have a massive burnout, go through a divorce, basically all the wheels fall off. And then I sort of worked out what I actually wanted to do. And I sort of realized, which again, you should always go back, I think, at times to what you wanted to do at 15, 16, 17, aka what you picked to do at university. Because I realized actually computer science, technology, engineering is actually sort of the common thread through all of those, bar possibly running around muddy.
So hold that thought. Hold that thought. I've got a question for you before you tell us your story at 15. Because I suspect you're about to answer with the question I'm about to ask you. You may be second guessing me, but imagine, this is a question we ask every guest. Imagine you had a phone now. I don't know how old you are, but you're a bit older than 25, right? Imagine you had a phone that you could call your 25-year-old self, right? What advice would you give your 25, or maybe even your 20-year-old self, given you went into the army pretty early? Like, what advice would you give yourself now, knowing what you know?
Yeah, I think I actually wasn't going on that tangent, but it's a very good question. I think for me, I think a little bit of patience would have gone a long way. But I think it's hard because being impatient had a lot of value. It just meant there was a lot more pain on the way through. And I think that's pretty hard on myself and everyone around me. So I think having patience and having sort of confidence in yourself that it'll all work out would have made such a big difference. I mean, I'm still quite fiery, but compared to then to now, like, I would have fought myself in the street just to prove I could have won. Like, I was really, really bad for it, which is good because that gave me lots of drive and like I wasn't going to be beaten or held back. But there's definitely a smoother way, as I've learned over the last 5 to 10 years, of how you can get the same result, I guess, with just a little bit less pain. And it's probably more for people externally than internally that pain will hit. But yeah, I think a little bit of patience, a little bit of decorum, and a little bit, I guess, of sort of respect for experience. But I also think it's hard, right? Because it's one of those situations where you become a product of your environment to a certain extent, without getting too philosophical. So you put sort of quite gung-ho, quite fiery alpha male tendencies onto a trading floor, which is surrounded by that, then it just really leans into all of those points, which again makes it slightly more convoluted. But I think, again, yeah, it's just that having that patience, having that confidence of it'll all kind of be okay, which hopefully wouldn't have dampened the sort of, I guess, optimistic, aggressive youth, because part of the youth is making mistakes, right? Uh,
Mm.
but yeah, it's a hard question to answer because I do think there's a lot of those hard lessons shaped me, and I wouldn't necessarily change them because of that.
Yeah. Quite a few people, we ask this question, everyone, quite a few people say that. They start out with an answer that's like, oh, I wish I'd have done this, I wish I'd have done that. But then they end up landing on the point that, did you know what though? If I'd have changed anything too much, I wouldn't be where I am. Right. And so there's a fair bit of path dependency in the way people think about it. Before you go on, I've got to ask you though, what was more stressful, driving a tank in the army or being on a quant trading floor?
Probably a quant trading floor. Actually, it sort of leads into this question we had recently, where at InsurX, actually, where they jokingly said they might need to get me personal insurance because I just have no regard for my own health or sort of injuries. And we sort of laughed it off. And then over sort of a few days and weeks later, they've gone and got insurance for me because I just don't care. So driving a tank and being in the battlefield didn't really impact me. I was sounding too much like a psychopath. And like, oh well, like if it's all over, it's all over. And if it's not all over, there'll be a hospital somewhere. I'll wake up in it. It'll all be okay.
Well,
So, so it's like one of those situations where I think I'm slightly wired differently, and I put that down to having my parents had me when they were 20, so just the very end of the 80s, and it was all quite chaotic. You know, I got my first motorbike at 3 years old. Like I spent at least 3/4 of my childhood in various caravans on building sites, building houses with power tools from like 5 onwards. Like it was pretty wild in a really good way. But like I always joke with people, like if you want to sort of prepare someone to live anywhere in any way, just give them the
give them
20-year-old
access to
parents
power tools. Give them access to power tools at a
exactly.
young age.
Yeah, power tools, motorbikes, petrol, and fire from sort of 3 onwards in the sort of early 90s pre-technology is a great way to do it.
Yeah, do you know what? It reminds me. There's a Larry Niven book, and I can't remember the name of the book actually. But anyway, the kind of the hook of the book is when you find out ultimately the twist is that the universe is this big machine that's selecting for luck, right? And when I hear stories about 3-year-olds with power tools and this kind of behavior, I think, yeah, actually, that is the universe is selecting for luck, right? Only the luckiest people get through this to get into middle age or whatever, to then tell their stories.
And exactly that. I mean, we're so good on the personal track, but I do think it makes a big difference. Of I guess having it wasn't really confidence because it's only confident now because when I look back, the career choice I made have worked out some way or another, and I say that from the point of view of my own metric, where I'm very happy. I've got a wife, I've got kids, I've got a job I enjoy. I think I'm reasonably good at it. I have autonomy there. Lots of the things I deem to be successful in my own lens has come off. So therefore I'm like, this is good for me. Doesn't mean it'll be good for anyone else. But I guess the kicker on that is where it comes back to sort of that childhood and those points is that really like bending it and then having to work out how to mend it, be it myself or motorbikes or whatever else it is, did give a lot of confidence that if I just 180 this and go a different direction, I'll kind of figure it out because I've been figuring it out since I was living memory, if that makes sense. And there's a great meme I saw, or like reel or whatever you want to call it. It's a second and a half long. So I guess it's a GIF with noise would be the way I describe it. Of it said, you worry a lot for someone who's already figured everything out up until this point. And it's kind of true of like, you sort of get in that mindset of figuring stuff out. And I think that genuinely, that adaptability has been really, really good. And it's probably one of the things I struggle most with now, of not being able to just 180 it or decide like, you know what, I'm off to become a pilot or something completely ludicrous, if you know what I mean. Because a lot of my life is spent there being like, when I left university, I was very briefly working at Barclays investment bank, sort of the hybrid between Barcap and Barclays main bank. And then I was like, right, I'm off to the army. And everyone's like, what? But you're on a grad scheme. You're getting paid like twice what everyone else is. And why are you going to the army? Like, well, I've looked around and everyone is quite old and boring and has lives I don't even want to consider ever having. So I'm off to the army to see what that does, because for the next 3 to 5 years, they're not going to let me do anything sensible. AKA, like, there's no sort of like corporate power tools I'm going to be allowed anywhere near. So I'll go to the army and have fun. It looks really respectable. When I come back at sort of 26, 27, 28, people will be like, oh, he's a sensible human being. We'll let him have the power tools now.
Yeah, you get to play with real power tools in the army.
Exactly. So your guns are even better.
I have to, if we're going to title this episode, I think we need to title it, if you bend it, you have to mend it. I've never heard that before. It's obviously a bit of a riff on, if you break it, you own it. But I like that. If you bend it, you have to mend it.
Yeah. And that's very, I mean, I remember the army in particular was bad for this, because this one of the things where the army's a great place, and I love the army, and I love the British cavalry to a certain extent. But the British cavalry is this like tiny little pocket of like the British army of madness. I think it's got a lot more professional now, which sounds mad. I only left 10 years ago, but I sort of hit the army, this sort of premises where, and you, don't quote me on this, but the cavalry is something like 1 to 3% of the British army type thing. Like, it's tiny, maybe 5%. We obviously get tanks and we have a lot of exposure, but there's a real sort of cavalier style approach to the British cavalry. And that's what they really, really want, because it gives a whole different dynamic.
It's in the name.
Well, exactly. Like, and they want that, and they want people to sort of do things that aren't really like, nothing illegal, I don't mean like that, but do things that are a little bit left of field, or just like shake the battlefield up to let the normal pattern of battle come across slightly differently. And so you definitely get some sort of oddballs in there. And then they got me. I sort of took this as very much like a, this is finishing school to sort of sand off a few edges, and I'll go back to the real world in not too distant future. So I really took it as like, let's have fun, and didn't do any of the sensible things, like none of the career courses. So I'm one of the few people who left the British Army as a lieutenant because they couldn't actually promote me because I'd done none of the courses. So normally, even if you leave after a short service commission, it's like this nice day and you leave the army and like, you're now a captain, but you've decided to leave and all the best. And I sort of got to the last day, and the adjutant, who's like the manager of the young officers, was like, yes, we need to promote you to captain. And I wore this like a badge of honor. I was like, no, you can't actually, because I'm still a lieutenant. I've done none of the courses. And he was like, oh, but what about your CV? And I remember saying to him in a very arrogant, cocksure way, I was like, I don't think the hiring manager of Citigroup's going to care what my job title from the army is, because they're not going to give me a gun on day one. And he just looked at me and was like, I've never thought of it like that. I was like, right, so I've had a lovely time. You've had a lovely time. Let's move on. Exactly. And it was just a really great moment, because I feel like that was the transition in my life and career from like really bending a lot of things and trying to work out how to mend it into, okay, I'm now a bit more of an adult. I've done my version of finishing school. I now need to lean into what the next 30 years looks like, because the first 30 years is, as I say, running around, seeing what happens. And so the second 30, which I'm nearly 10 into now, is very much like, not necessarily plateauing, but stabilizing that stuff out to decide what the legacy looks a little bit more like.
What do you think, what do you think the military taught you, or what have you taken from the military that you might not have gotten if you had have just gone the traditional route as, let's just say, software engineer? You got in, you did your comp sci degree, became a junior engineer, and now you're head of engineering, obviously a more conventional path. Like, what do you think your path has given you that a normal path wouldn't?
Yeah, so again, and I think I'm sort of trying hard not to get too fixated on the sort of, I guess, the confidence theme, but like, I really believe that the confidence of managing people is what I took away from the army so well. And that's the big, like, the nice big box ticking exercise, because it's kind of hard to explain. And the British Army does it in a pretty good way, where they basically take all of the officers, and then you have intakes, and you all go to Sandhurst together. And then when you're at Sandhurst, you spend an entire year there learning how to lead people and manage people to a certain extent. It's really lead, it's not manage. The soldiers in the army sort of manage themselves with the sort of the senior soldiers and stuff. So you're there to basically provide that focal point. But there's quite an interesting dynamic when you unpick it, which is, if everyone there thinks they're God's gift to leading, and that's why they're a British Army officer and they're at Sandhurst, and you have to lead 29 of these other people, it's actually quite a challenging experience because you're there with 29 people who think they're equally, if not better than you, and you have to try and lead them on a sort of pretend mission and things. So you basically spend a year sort of, psychologically warring with each other of how to basically manage and lead. And you see an insane amount of stuff. Which is really helpful. And then obviously you leave there and then you go to the actual regular army and you get given soldiers who obviously respect the rank structure, but it's a very different concept because they have a job they want and you have the job you want. And it led to a really interesting point, which is where it took me probably maybe 4 months, maybe 6 months to realize, and it's why I think I was actually a slightly better officer than some, is soldiers don't necessarily want your job. In fact, very few of them do because you do fundamentally a different job. So a lot of people will be like, I'm the officer, I'm in charge, people want my job. Whereas actually a lot of the soldiers don't want that. They want to do their job because it's very different. And we joked at the start of the episode about driving a tank. I've probably driven a tank for about 4 hours in my life because I had a driver. So it's like, I would be sort of the little man on top of the tank with his head poking out, see where we're going, trying to have half an eye on where the rest of the tanks are, because every now and again, some of the slightly more junior soldiers would tell me where they are on the map, but they're not actually there because they can't always read the map very well, especially when they're in training exercises. So I was like peeking out the top, trying to find them all as they're sort of driving around. And that's it. Whereas there's guys who just like love driving the tank or love firing the big gun on the tank or all of that stuff. Like it's really, really different. And the same way as some of the soldiers just don't care about dealing with everyone else. They just want to be selfish. They want to go back and play Xbox, or they want to go and exercise or see their girlfriends and all of those things. So it really taught me the fact that if you can lead and manage people who don't want to be led and managed at Sandhurst with no, I guess, technical skills, because you're just cold, wet, and in the dark in a forest with a map, then you can probably lead anyone, especially whenever you're in a corporate environment. People go home every day. People aren't getting shot at, which is really makes it a lot easier to manage people at times. And you can buy them lunch or coffee. It just made this whole big different dynamic with a sort of a small overlay of people don't necessarily want your job or your life. And when you see that really up close and personal, it gives you a lot more empathy to understand what is driving them rather than just the arrogant assumption that it must be to have what you have.
Do you think how different do you think that is to I say the real world? I think maybe that's the real world, and the world we live in isn't the real world sometimes, but in the other world that we inhabit, how different? You said two things that I want to pick up on. So first of all, that, which I think is a really interesting insight about the sometimes people just want to do their job, right, and they don't want yours, because so I have some feelings on that idea as well. But the second thing you said, which I think is very interesting, was you said that Sandhurst was about leadership, not about management. And regular listeners to the podcast will have heard me say more than once that the idea that being promoted to management is a promotion. Sorry, it's not a promotion; it's a career change. But being promoted to leadership is another career change, which is different to management, right? Because management and leadership are very different things. And so I'm interested if you want to sort of bring it, from the army back to the real world, maybe answer those two questions in. I've said it again. Back to the world we now inhabit. bring it back to that environment and just reflect on that a bit, because I think they're two very interesting points.
I'll start with the sub point, which is the real world versus not the real world. And there's a really good point with the British Army, or the Army in general, actually, and war, which is it's a reflection of society, but it doesn't mean it is society. So I think this is the real world, because if the other side's the real world and we end up in a world war situation again, I'm worried about the current reflection of society, given given the unemployment levels. But I do take your point.
For the record, though, I'm a pacifist, if that's possible, but I have enormous respect. I have enormous respect for people who literally put their life on the line to defend their country. Right. So I just want to get that on the record. I'm not diminishing it in any way.
No, of course.
Yeah. No, I think the people who make decisions to go to war, often I feel like they should be people who have had experience in what that is, and quite often that's not the case.
Yeah, exactly.
As we're seeing at the moment.
And I would agree with that too. And actually, I don't want to say, because I don't want to miss the management versus leadership point, because it's super relevant. But I had a really interesting point when I was in the army, actually. And I don't know if the commanding officer of the regiment was playing a bit of a joke, but whenever I was there, it was during the whole campaign for female officers to be allowed to join teeth arms. And the decision had to be made.
What was that word?
So teeth arms are like infantry cavalry, so basically frontline troops, and it was female.
What's the word? Teeth arms.
Yeah. So like the fighting teeth. Yeah. It's a terminology. Sorry, but anyway, it was for females to join the front lines, basically, both as soldiers and officers. The decision hadn't been made yet, and it was one of those weird situations where only I could find myself in this situation, where I was at dinner and a potential officer was coming to visit our regiment who was female, because even though the decision has been made, the way the timing would work out is that she'd be eligible to join our regiment if females were allowed to join the Teeth Arms. So we were sitting at dinner, and we were all being very polite, and obviously it was one of those situations where we had to err on the side of caution. But she started asking a few questions about various things, and I turned to her, and I've been thinking about it all day. No, I wasn't expecting this at dinner, and said, why is it you're desperate to kill people? And she sort of looked at me and was like, well, I don't understand the question. I was like, well, at the end of the day, you're fighting very hard for your right to come onto the front lines with men to do a job that we don't necessarily want to do. So you must really want to kill people. And it brings up a really interesting dynamic, because I would relate to your pacifist point. And because she then pushed it back on me. I was like, well, why are you here? I was like, well, I'm here because someone has to do this job. And I'm incredibly arrogant, and I reckon I'm better than most people doing this job. So more of my boys are going to come home alive than the enemy's boys if I have to go and do it. But I wouldn't necessarily go and seek out killing people and fight for that right to a certain extent. And she sort of looked at me, and then, as you can imagine, it caused a bit of a sort of a hullubub the next day. And there was a bit of we had a little coffee chat with coffee, which it's never a good thing. But it's a very valid point of why are you fighting to do a job that isn't actually that great? Because I'll be honest, trudging in behind enemy lines and going into deep recce and having to kill people is really not that nice. But at times it's super required, which I guess segues in a little bit neatly into sort of management in a very different way. Because I sort of have this viewpoint, which is, and I've seen it a lot, of where management is the requirement to maintain something or keep it going. And that's where micromanagement comes from. So in my head, there's a real element of where management becomes this quasi-leg, middle managing and micromanaging, all those various points where you take someone who's got technical skills, and then you elevate them, and then you expect them to become scalable because their technical skills can be basically managed with juniors beneath them, and then you end up with this pyramid of management. And it's very similar to how the British Army is laid out. But again, the British Army is laid out in that way because it makes a lot of sense, where it's like every day you've got to get the soldiers up and they've got to shave or clean their guns or look after the tanks or the horses or whatever it may be. So you manage those tasks to provide efficiency for then leadership, aka the officer, to come in to decide how to deploy that efficiency when it's required. And I think it's very similar in the real world. It's just that people get all bent out of shape about whether they're manager or not, or whether they're leader, and leader doesn't have a title with manager in it because no one gets told, that they're head of engineering leadership, et cetera, or lead. Was it be team? I suppose you get team lead now, but you get my point of where all these management positions is more of the duplication and management of the task rather than the leading of people to have an effect where it isn't necessarily expected.
But there is a fundamental difference between the military and the kind of business world, right? Which is that in the military you can literally pull rank, right? There is a rank system there that people respect, even if they don't like it. They're kind of obliged to respect it, and that's a bit softerly, a bit less heavily enforced in the business world.
Yes, but I think, and it's actually something I've struggled with slightly recently. But I think it's one of those. I guess what's jumping out at me really aggressively is if you have to rely on rank rather than respect in the military, you've lost the war and the battle.
No, if you rely on, that's true. That's definitely true in business as well. Right? I would argue.
Yeah. I think it's true across both. But I think it's just the thing about the military. What it does is, because of the rank system, it warrants respect faster because there's a very natural pecking order to a certain extent. And I think what people miss slightly is that pecking order is slightly more rigid because it is genuinely hard to hold certain ranks because you have to go through certain tests, and they're very much detailed out, and therefore if there's no ambiguity. You either pass the test or you don't. You get the rank, you don't get the rank. Now, again, there's obviously times it's not quite perfect, but it really helps with that. Whereas I think in the corporate world, people sort of strive for meritocracy, but whenever they get average, because the meritocracy leads to average results, they're not very happy with it. So then they start to drive for other outcomes. And I've been really working hard and thinking about this for a long time now, a couple of years, because I've experienced it a few times where I like to think within reason. I am quite good at either hiring or managing or pulling together high performance teams. And I use the term managing there on purpose rather than leading a high performance team, because I think you have to manage the high performance team so that it becomes high performance, and then you can lead from that. And the reason why I say that is because it all comes down to a high trust environment. So I think I don't want to make this too like army versus the real world, because I think the wider context is actually cleaner, which is regardless of the environment, if you're in a low trust environment, you have to rely on management to garner the trust and build the relationships to then lead to a certain extent. And then if you go into a high trust environment with high performing people, it's a very different world. And I think I can give a very good example, like the SAS is a good example of this, but I think there's a better one, which is more personal to me. Whenever I left the military and went to the trading floor of Citigroup, I remember being there. I obviously just left the army. I'd lots of army-specific accolades, and I already joked with the adjutant upon leaving, why would they care about this? But I was incredibly humble because for large parts of my life, be it sport, be it the military, I've been in high performance environments. And I think the biggest thing for me in those environments is it doesn't matter who's the water boy and who's the quarterback, as long as the job's getting done and the team survives. So I remember being at Citigroup, and I remember spending the first at least 6 months, could be 9 months, where all I did was get coffee and lunch and just shut up and just kept quiet and then just did whatever was required. I didn't complain. I didn't grumble. I didn't care. And I remember a few people came up to me, especially some of the other graduates, and were like, you're 26 years of age, you were in the army, you used to be a tank commander, now you're getting people coffee all day. And I was like, yeah, but it's great, because at the end of the day, like, I'm really good at getting people coffee. I'm class at getting all the change right and what people want for lunch, and it doesn't bother me. And to be honest, all of those screens and all of those pretty colors and numbers mean nothing to me. Like, for the first 6 months, I had no idea what was a trading system, what was Bloomberg, what was Sky News to a certain extent, because just this wall of noise and colors. But I knew exactly how to get someone a flat white and a pan of chocolate for breakfast, and I absolutely nailed it.
Yeah. I don't know where to go with that. There is this joke about Shane Warne should never, even if Shane Warne's the best lawnmower in the world, he should never mow his own lawn, right? I think you just described comparative advantage, right? That old story where no matter, you should always do the thing you're best at, right? Even if the thing that you're second best at is still the best in the world, you should still do the thing you're best at.
Yeah, interesting. More the angle I was going was it was building more of a high trust environment where and it's actually a different angle, because it's like, if they need a coffee, I'll go and get the coffee, and then the whole team as an organization goes. I mean, very quickly, I became the best trader on the floor. I rewrote the desk and then got headhunted into a hedge fund after 2 years. Meanwhile, there was guys I was working with who'd been there 6, 7, 8 years who were desperate for that job. So
the lesson is to look for the guy who's best at getting coffee and promote him. What you've just described, to kind of bring this back to what kind of the business world is, what you just described is a version of a thing called situational leadership. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
If you know that framework, I'll drop a link in the show notes. And I use this all the time. It's very interesting, because people often go looking for a kind of normative recipe for things. Like, they go looking for a solution for things, and it's like, in this situation, do this. But there's one answer for all solutions. Sorry, and it's the point about situational leadership, which I really like, is that depending on the level of trust that you've got, it talks about performance readiness as opposed to trust, but it's a very similar idea, right? Depending on where someone is, you need to, in order to get them to do something, you can tell them to do it. In a different context, you can sell the idea to them. In a different context, you participate with them, collaborate with them, right, and to do it. And then, finally, there's this idea of you just delegate, right? And that journey along that, I don't know what they call it, the influence behaviors, of the leader very much depends on the trust relationship that you've got with the folks around you.
It is exactly that. And that's where, I didn't go into the whole big spiel of it, but it's what I learned partly in the army and partly from high performance sport and those various things, which is, and I guess the army example will be more natural to people because it's an easier mental model to pull together. But like, the Green Army is really good at the sort of rank structure, whatever it may be. Then you sort of drift towards the special forces. And there, if you ever watch them do like house clearances or the kill rooms or stuff like that, like, it's almost subconscious, because as soon as they see someone go left, they have total trust, and then they go right through the door. Or as soon as someone says, get this or do that, or you're cleaning the guns and I'll do this, it almost is not like that sort of Shane Ward analogy on top of the situational leadership of where it all just slots together because you do whatever you're best at and the whole team is self-fulfilling and full trust, and it doesn't care because there's no ego, there's no hierarchy of I should do this.
Yeah.
And it's exactly the same in all of my teams. I try really hard where like bug bashing is a really classic one where the juniors get all the bugs. And it's like in my team, everyone gets all of the bugs because it's like everyone's equal to a certain extent. Now, don't get me wrong. There's times whenever I send out my junior to get the coffees, because if it's a complicated bug and he's going to spin his wheels for 4 hours, that's not a good use of time if we're up against it. Same way as there's lots of times where I'll go and get the coffees because, again, back to the sort of the Citigroup days, I'll go out, I'll spend 20 minutes getting the coffee, I'll ring a mate, I'll wander around London in the sun, and I'll come back with the coffees, and everyone's like no one's ever angry with the guy who's bringing the coffee. Do you know what I mean? It's like the water boy at a football game. No one's ever angry with the water boy.
Yeah. Do you know what? This is another one of my little hacks, kind of management leadership hacks, right? Which is the walk and talk. And I like to do one-on-ones as a walk and talk. So, hey, so-and-so, let's go get a coffee. Right, a little 5-minute walk out to the coffee shop in the sun.
Exactly.
I mean, hopefully the sun like it is today, but in London often it's not the sun. But a little walk outside to come back, and that walking the legs triggers the brain to behave slightly differently, and you can have some very, very good conversations very efficiently with people, and it's a great way to get around the direct reports. Right.
Yes.
And go down a level, right, and down and skip a couple of levels and go and talk to people actually doing the work and get to listen, right, to turn your ears on and listen to what's going on. It's
exactly.
A very good tip.
And I do that. So I do that a lot. And there's 3 ways I deploy it, which I think are really, really helpful. One is, as I said, the first one, which is where it's like, if they're really annoying me, I go and have a walk so I don't fight them because it can get a bit frustrating. Not that I would ever physically fight anyone, of course.
No, of course not.
But then the second one is, as you say, I'll say to one of them, like, hey, Mike, hey, Harry, whoever, like, let's go grab a coffee. But then I'll always be like to the whole team, right, who wants a coffee? We're going to get them today. And we'll have a chat. So therefore, everyone's included. And the reason I do that is because we need to have one-to-ones and people are aware there's an element of privacy there. But if people feel like you're pulling different people off for coffees and they're not included in that coffee run, it gives a different psychological bias, because then everyone spends the entire time you're off desk working on what's going on rather than they've gone to get the coffees. So there's a wee trick there. And then the second thing I sometimes do less frequently is, if 1 or 2 people need to talk about something and they're spinning their wheels, I'll send 2 of them to get coffee together, because then they'll talk on their way there. And normally, at least 6 times out of 10, if not more than that, whatever problem is trying to get resolved that they need to either work on, be it personal, be it like actual programming problem, whatever it may be, they normally get to an 80% solution, and I'm getting a cup of coffee off the back of it. So other than my credit card bill getting hammered from walks and talks and all the variations of how you get coffee. Exactly.
Yeah, money well spent. It reminds me of a hack that I had with my 2 kids. They were having an argument one day, and the details of the argument don't matter. It was completely trivial. But my wife and I sent them to the summer house, and I said, you're not coming out until you've got an agreement.
Yeah. Yeah, right? Exactly.
And so they're only a year apart. I think they might have been sort of 15, 16 or something when this happened. So they sat down there, and one or the other would keep coming back up to us, and we go, have you got an agreement? Well, no, back you go. And so it took them about an hour and a half, and they eventually got a negotiated agreement, came back. It's like, right, great. And it was such a watershed moment. They sort of realized that the petty arguing with each other was a total and utter waste of time. And if they kept doing that, they were going to get stuck in the summer house negotiating with each other for another hour every time they did it. So they quickly turned it around. It was good.
Yeah, exactly. And it's exactly that. But I think, and just to arc this back to the management leadership thing from before, and it's not clean, and there's no clean delineation. Like, we haven't gone from like, I'm managing you guys to I'm leading you guys. But now whenever I look at my team, and I had a conversation this week about how we're going to expand the team out and hire probably a back-end engineer as an example, that conversation was super easy because there's psychological safety there, because for the first 3 to 4 months of us all working together, there was a lot of management on what I expect and the standards and how all that fits together to build that high trust environment, to the extent where the most junior guy on the team once pinged me about 3 weeks ago and was very kind and handled this exceptionally well. Sent me a side message on Teams basically saying, I'm sure you wrote this with AI. I'm sure, you're on the way to the airport, you're about to go on holiday, it slipped through the net, but 3 points in that stand-up weren't good enough. And I feel I should say this to you. I don't want you to change it because I'm happy with it, but it's not accurate. And I don't think that's a standard you would expect from us. And therefore it's important we adhere to the standards we've all agreed together. And I was like, straight back being like, thank you so much. Thank you so much for telling me about this.
This is to you, not from you. This is to you.
No, to me. Yeah. And I was like, and the most junior guy on the team, right? He's been out of university less than a year, right? And I was like, thank you so much. First of all, for having the confidence to come and speak to me about this and giving me the opportunity to change it. I changed the points because he was right. I didn't get into the whole like, yeah, I was rushed to the airport about since 4 and blah, blah. Like, all that's all relevant. The point is that it was not the standard I expect. I then took that and then went on to our internal like praise system, put it on the praise system, like this is what I expect from my team. Because that to me was the turning point of like, they now get it. Right? Like, I get it, they get it. We're now in a high trust leadership situation where it's like, I'm rubbish at writing async stand-up notes. I'll go and get the coffee and that's cool. If you know what I mean. Now, obviously, I can't do that all the time, but it's like, that's whenever you realize that actually you're in that environment, to the extent where now we're hiring a back-end engineer. I spoke to him and everyone's like, yeah, cool, that makes sense. And it's like, no one's reporting lines are changing. I'm still in charge. I'm still leading this. We're all in this together, but like, this is the way it's at. And then there was no animosity, there was no fear, there was nothing else. But the other thing that came out of it, which I think really drove that, and I think this is a hack, it's a high risk hack, but is they're doing the CV sift and they're doing round 1. So I don't even get to see anyone that they haven't approved as being acceptable for round 2 onwards, which means that ultimately, as I said to them, like, it's not my team, it's our team, and they're going to work with this person more than I am. And like, yes, I have to vet them to make sure that they're going to work. And obviously, there's devolved responsibility, which doesn't really work, but there's sort of like, what's the other terminology for it? It's like, there's sort of collective responsibility for the team dynamic, which is what I'm trying to empower here. Hence why they're doing like team fit. Does he say the right things? Is Ben going to possibly like him or not like him from the point of view, like, can he work in our environment type situation? So they're fully in charge of that. So if they veto everyone, I'll never get to interview anyone for second round / technical round, which again, I think is a really good hack for people really feeling like this is our team and therefore we can lean on each other, both just out of work, because we chat about what people are doing and on all of those nice things. And it makes a big, big difference, I think. Whereas a lot of corporate structures don't really buy into that. And it's not a situation where I'm trying to, micromanage them outside of work. I don't really care, but I'm happy to have those chats. And that's something you learn in the army, where it's like, people can only come and do their best work if they can actually be focused on what's going on, right? Like the guy whose wife's pregnant, you've got him in the middle of Brecon running around the hills, isn't there because he's mentally thinking about his pregnant wife who's got a complication. Okay. And actually he becomes a bigger issue. And again, I'm using the mental model of the battlefield because it makes more sense. But like, that's a bigger issue. It's better he's not there at all than he's there unfocused or sort of unengaged. And it's the same with like bad team members, unengaged team members. Like, once that rot gets into the team, you're in serious trouble.
I want to just drop one little reference in here for the show notes, which is a fantastic article from a few years back, 2021, called "Everyone Lies to Leaders." And if you haven't read it, I'll leave a link. You should go and read it. But you just reminded me of it as you're talking there. One of the things you need to be wary of, though, when you do what you're saying, which I did something very similar. Like, by the time folks got to me to interview, that was a done deal, right? The folks were very, very good. I very, very rarely had anyone who got up to me that it wasn't a yes. But you have to be aware of this idea that people often don't set out to lie to you, but they just do because they want to please leadership. And so you have to the system a little bit every now and again just to get under it. And like that skip meeting with a coffee thing is one way to do that.
That is very, yes, because yes, it's a bit like when people get their back against the wall, they don't want to lie, but one little lie here then just balloons into suddenly this minefield of madness.
People don't do it. They don't set out, like, they don't come to work and they want to go, hey, I really want to go and lie to the boss today. That's why I'm here. That's not what people do. Right? But there's just a way of telling stories that is psychologically self-preserving in some cases. You just need to be aware of it, which I'm sure you are. Bringing it, speaking of psychology, and I want to bring it back to because we're so off piste here. It's great. Like, I knew this would happen from the plan, but bring it back to the our running sheet. Talk about psychological cost, and you've done some career pivots there. Just talk to me about how that affected you. Why did you do it? What do you think has been the cost versus the reward of that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think again, we've sort of gone through it, so I don't need to hash into the exact pivots per se, but try and keep it high level. I think a lot of the pivots in hindsight look sensible. For example, very STEM orientated computer science degree, wants to go and round off some of the edges, goes to the army to get better at leading, being around people, goes to the particularly social side, like small nebulous part of the army. Like, again, there was obviously a bit of premeditation there. It's where I wanted to go. It's what I thought would be best for me. But a lot of them also were kind of thrust upon me. And we get back to this sort of, the world optimizes for luck. To a certain extent. So to give an example of this, whenever I was left, when I was at university, I was meant to join the RAF as a fighter pilot. I had a place. I was due to start. Then the 2012 defence review kicked in. I lost my place. They were like, I was some silly job title, like, do you want to be a battle space commander? And I'm like, absolutely not. Like, I want to be Top Gun. Like, it's either Top Gun or nothing. And even then, if I'd stuck the course, I don't know. I mean, my cousin is actually a fighter pilot in the RAF. So there's an element where I have a little bit of understanding of that. He's nearly 10 years older than me. So I've really seen it, and I knew what I was expecting to a certain extent. But so I ended up in Barclays. It was like completely the wrong job for me. I got that job because I went to a friend's house the day after, and he was like, oh, take my application form for Barclays. The deadline's tomorrow. So I submitted his application form by switching the first and last sentence on each paragraph. And then I got the job and he didn't. Like, complete madness, like as you do when you're 21 at university and a total idiot. But I guess the point is that I feel like a lot of them at the time didn't feel as premeditated and as planned out as sort of retrospectively they look like. But I think the kicker here and the psychological impact was there was an element of my back being against the wall, so I had to make a success of it. And I'm driven that way, where I want to do well and try hard at everything I achieve from there. But that then led to this really like, I've got to make a success of this, because if I don't make a success of this, people are going to think I'm an idiot because I gave up a good job at Barclays to go to the army. I took a 50% pay cut at 22 to go to the army, with the idea that I'm only going to be in the army for a few years because it's not my long-term career type thing. So there's a real impact of like, this has to work out, which I think it took me a long time to sort of get on top of. It's why I probably had quite a big sort of burnout in my sort of early 30s. And I sort of realized at points where I was sort of finding myself in the wrong track or in the wrong part of life. And I had to do like even bigger U-turns. Like I had to leave finance. I had to get divorced. Like there's a whole big thing where my life was really on this like track of a large house in Primrose Hill and 7 figures and incredibly stressful and au pairs and a wife that went to boarding school and all of these very lovely but sort of tutti frutti friends from a guy who like went to stay at school and lived in a caravan in Northern Ireland. I'm like, whoa, I've really drifted hard left here, which meant I had to sort of, or hard right, yeah, exactly, to be very hard right. So I had to really sort of pull it back. But I think one of the outcomes of that is, it took me a long time, I guess, to realize that like failure is okay. Like, yeah, it's not great. We shouldn't aim for it, but like, it's okay to fail at things. It's okay to like have a go. I mean, I was never scared of having a go, but I was always scared of like having a go and looking silly type thing. And then I think the second thing that came out of it was, and I'm not trying to put this onto other people because it's my story and my issue and my problem to sort of iron out, but people also sort of get this like stereotypical viewpoint of where they're like, you were in the army, therefore you must have a really tidy room and be really disciplined and can't do complex computer science, for example. Or like you used to be in finance, so you're really good at numbers, but you can't like manage people because all you did was sit and make money all day. And these like pre-depositions of like, yeah, but I can kind of do both. I mean, I need the right environment. Like, for example, if you were to give me a gun and a big heavy rucksack now and told me to go and live in the woods for a week, I could probably muddle my way through it, but I wouldn't be particularly good at it because the environment and the training of late hasn't been very good. The same way as if you put me back on the trading floor, I probably would lose a little bit of money, not a lot of money, but I wouldn't make a lot of money like I used to because the environment and that has sort of moved around slightly. But I think people who aren't used to and haven't had non-linear careers themselves are a little bit more reticent of like, can you do both? And I think that's been a tough thing to come together and to sort of do. And I think it comes back to this point of patience where, like in my current role, there's times whenever I'm just head of engineering and that's cool. I was standing CTO of a hedge fund, so I've done that CTO type work before. And there's times whenever I have to do more CTO style stuff. We don't have a CTO. So in theory, I am head of engineering / CTO in sort of role at times. And people are quite surprised, like, oh, you're quite good at this. It's like, well, I did do it for nearly a year in a hedge fund. But I'm here trying to be disciplined and being respectful. I'm head of engineering. This is my little train set. I'm just over here. I can do that over there if you want me to, but you need to sort of empower me because I don't want to step on other people's toes. And that's where sort of, I guess, the patience and discipline I'm sort of trying to learn, I guess, and be better at this. And I'm starting to see the fruition of that because as the quarters roll into years, people, once they get to know me and they build that trust, back to that sort of, I guess, situational leadership, know they can trust me in those other environments. And therefore, I guess the psychological burden becomes a lot less because all of that experience is then reusable and people then provide respect. And I guess I get that feeling of satisfaction for doing a good job, right? Which is why I went and got all of those, I guess, transferable and mixed skills.
Do you think now you are likely to be on a more linear path from where you are now as a head of engineering or do you see yourself maybe doing something completely different again in the future?
No, I think I'm on a linear path. I guess the kicker from this slightly, and this gets into more of a sort of personal, like why do you work, what's your drive type thing, is I think industry-wise it will change, but I think what I've worked out, and there's a really big theme here of where I've always hated technology. I still hate technology now, to be honest. But what I love is like really succinct, good solutions to problems, which tend to have technology sort of overhangs with that. So as a silly example, but again, it's a really good mental model. When I was in the army, I built an entire database system so that we could manage all of the soldiers' careers and qualifications across the regiment, because I used to get really annoyed because the very good soldiers would be known because there was 200 or 300 of them, with the ones with the right qualifications who got lots of exercise, which meant that they would spend a lot more time away from their families because they would have to go and do all of the difficult jobs because they were good at or had the right qualifications. But actually, when you got the database together and did some stats around it, you worked out that a lot more people had the qualifications than others, and they kept those qualifications quiet so they didn't have to go away from their family as much. So the way the army was scheduled was that basically each sort of subdivision of the regiment all had their own little tribe, and there was no sort of like uniformity across the regiment. There's no real database system that managed this because all the officers were managed amongst themselves. And again, there was a big sort of statistical variance of how good the officers were. So it's a really good example of where I then use technology to basically give every soldier a unique ID and then her qualifications in a centralized system with a collection of Excel spreadsheets so that this would become a lot fairer for everyone. Again, super trivial. I wouldn't really call it technology or computer science as much as sort of just sensible management across an organization. But it's a really good example of where like building cool tech in my head is not using the latest database system. It's solving a real world problem really, really well so that people look at it and go, how do we live before this? And actually, more so than that, they look at it and go, this is so simple, this must be easy to do. And that's when I get a real kick, whenever people see a solution and it seems almost trivial to them, even though the problem existed 2 weeks ago. And 2 weeks later, they're like, yeah, but that problem never existed. You're like, no, my friend. You had that problem for 5 years. They're like, that was a catastrophic problem.
Do you know what? The idea that simple doesn't mean easy eludes almost everyone, right? And very, very few people kind of land on the realization that actually simple is not easy. Simple is very hard. Right, very hard, and yeah. So it's something to yeah. I mean, I find that very frustrating when something. Wow, this is really simple, and you go, yeah. It took me ages to get this right.
Yeah, exactly. And so I guess to react on your point, which is where it's like, I think I will continue in that sphere of technology engineering. I'm not sort of going to this mad entrepreneur, but also from a personal standpoint, I think it's really relevant, which is where I don't need too much money to be happy and to maintain my lifestyle. And I'm not saying that from the point of view of like there is a bias there, because I've never had the opportunity to have that much money. Like as a portfolio manager, I earned 7 figures a year. I saved loads of it because I just didn't really spend it. I've still got some really nice, a beautiful collection of road bikes. As my wife will keep reminding me, I barely ride now. My ex-wife had a similar viewpoint, but what happened to her, and I do warn my current wife about this at times. But the matter is that like I've got a few vices like cycling, like noisy, expensive t-shirts, which in the great scheme of things are very, very cheap. But I guess the point is that like I'm very fortunate. I've realized that like I like a certain standard, but that standard of living is very comfortable within a normal sort of head of engineering style remit. Again, know what that means for the next 10, 20, 30 years with regards to like having autonomy over what jobs I do, what technology I work in, where I work. I'm very fortunate because I can do that because I don't have a ridiculously large mortgage or any big cost base that needs to be sort of facilitated. I'm not working for pleasure either. I'm in that middle ground where as long as I earn enough money to pay for groceries and the odd holiday, and that can scale with the salary I get, we're pretty set, to be honest. And my wife doesn't work. We've got a very nice lifestyle. So I think I will probably have more pivots in not necessarily chasing the new shiny thing, but chasing the right environments where I can have a fun time because I want to do it because it's fun. And as I'm sure you guys can appreciate it, and hopefully some of the listeners can appreciate as well, as having such a varied high octane life up until this point, I'm pretty insufferable without a job or a heavy focus. I do not cope well with lying by a pool.
With what, sorry?
Lying by a pool, like on a sun lounger.
Oh,
I do not.
lying by a pool.
Lying by a pool. Yeah, right. So let's pivot slightly, but I just want to segue off that one of those comments there. It feels like you're deriving some personal satisfaction from being good at being a software engineer, at least in part, and by also being good at being a leader. Do either of those things change under the influence of AI?
Yeah, so it's a really good point. I think for me, and this is actually interesting. So it's we get back to the simple thing earlier, and actually there's a real dynamic which is very pivotal because I've had a very tough 4 days, to be honest. But I think for me, AI is a tool set and it just supercharges it. I think how I view technology over my whole life is like technology that is there to make simple problems seem easy, effectively. Make difficult problems with simple solutions seem easy. Sorry, I should rephrase that slightly. And so AI just like supercharges that, where you can go and take these like abstract ideas and very quickly get to some sort of fruition from it. And actually, it's a good segue. Whenever I joined InsurX, we're doing a 0 to 1 build, but we already have a platform. So it's a mixture of like a re-platform plus making it better, plus this really complicated sort of technology enhanced process, and we're building an actual platform now. In theory, we have some RFPs out to sell this platform to other parts of the insurance industry while we also run ourselves. It's a really interesting dynamic of like, is it a managed service? Is it SaaS? Is it like one big platform we're selling that people plug into with their own white labeling, and how all that fits together, which is why it's a really nice. It's a problem I get really excited about, basically, because at the end of the day, not to pivot in the solution, it's almost irrelevant, but if people can trade or exchange complicated and specialist insurance in a way that seems trivial, this is a problem that's been around for 20, 30 years, and suddenly we have a technological solution that solves that. That'll be a good legacy in my sort of egotistical world to leave behind. But what that means with AI is, there's a period there up until about February where I think over 4 or 5 months I'd burnt like 8 billion tokens myself and was running like hundreds of thousands of lines of like reasonably good production code, and it was really, really good. And genuinely, like, it wasn't messy from the point of view of it was all vibe coded. It was just using a tool really well. So we still had the same QA process, we still have unit tests, we still have Playwright. And this is why I think AI is really powerful in the coding space, because you have such a variability of engineers and you've got such a rigid SDLC process. Everyone has their own sort of fine tuning of the actual process, but it's very well documented, and engineers become a little bit interchangeable among companies. You can then decide, depending on the quality of the AI, which of those subtasks get done by AI and which bit don't, and where the speed up is, as an example. So it was pretty good, and I think I've been running teams either with AI or as AI, the agents themselves directly, for over 3 years now, as a builder AI, which is a very famous unicorn that went sort of bust. I don't think we pivot that as a whole episode on itself, but there my job was to basically run a platform for engineers and AI, and also our engineers would use AI to supplement the development process. So I've really been doing this for a long time now, but from October, November last year through to the end of February this year, the advances in how good the AI was and how you could do a planning session and have a one-shot solution was incredible. I'm about to pivot heavily here because in the news articles, people have seen in March and into the start of April, it started to degrade really badly. And I don't want to turn this into a technical standpoint from the point of view of why, to do with harnesses and the API token optimization of the context versus the inference model. All of that change really degraded it. And it was the perfect storm. It coincided me went on holiday for a few weeks here and there and on and off. So I came back and I'm sort of going through some of the code reviews and some of the work I'd done as well. And I hold my hands up. It wasn't, it some of it slipped through, which meant for the last 3.5 days, I've been hand cranking Python again, like a couple of thousand lines a day, to basically clean up a little bit of part of the evaluation engine to get rid of. It's not slop code, but it's a very convoluted solution. It could be a lot easier with some good, dry, polymorphic, deterministic principles that AI just couldn't quite see itself around. And this is where I think we're back to the point, which is where it's like AI is really, really good in that tool set because it lets people take ideas and craft these solutions if they know what the solution needs to be. But depending on the sophistication, and it's a bit like a drug, if you get hooked on it and the drug quality diminishes dramatically, like it has done for last month, you need to know what you're doing and how to unpick that so that you don't end up with a mess.
And not again, just take more of the drug.
Correct, exactly. And this is the whole thing. And this is where I get back to the point of, and it's my big mantra with AI is only ask AI a question you know the answer to. And if you don't know the answer to that question, ask AI questions to research it until you do know the answer you want, then ask AI basically. And it's a bit like, you know, you can go and get an average engineer or a collection of average engineers and put a manager on top of them or a leader on top of them, and then who maybe isn't as technically minded. And then the outcome you get from this isn't great. It's like the Steve Jobs principle of they want doers, not thinkers. Like thinkers and managers don't actually create good technology because they don't have the context and situational leadership or awareness to basically craft that through. And that's how I view AI. It very much as being part of that tool set. I'm not crazy enough to think of as another employee, but it's a bit like, would you have your junior do the production release of a complicated evaluation algorithm? Probably not. That's sort of a head of engineering / senior back-end engineer style task. And it's that sort of discretion and slightly more holistic leadership viewpoint, I think is what matters, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, I always think of things in sort of why, what, and how, right? So why is the job of leadership? What is the job of, peers collaborating on work out what to do? And then how you kind of get out of the way and let folks who know how to do stuff go and do it. And at this stage, and I keep prefacing all of these comments on AI with at least as it stands, because this stuff's changing so quickly. I used to be quite absolutist about some of these things, but I'm not anymore because it just changes so quickly. But I wouldn't ever let the AI determine why, and very rarely do I let it determine what on its own, right? But I'm more than happy for it to do the how.
Exactly.
Right? And because I've worked out the why, and then I'll rub a duck with it on the what.
Yeah.
And then the how almost falls out from that. But if you, it's a bit like if you've got a job, if you've got some fine filigree metal, right? And you want to sand it off and, get it back to be nice and polished. You could do that with like some very high grade sandpaper and special tools, or you could get a sandblaster. Right.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
sandblaster. And the risk, if it's soft metal, the risk with a sandblaster is you're going to ablate the metal away. Right.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what you've got here, right? You've ablate the entire surface area of your source tree with AI without too much difficulty at all. Right. And if you're not pointing the sandblaster in the right direction.
Exactly. And that's exactly what I've been doing this week. And it's actually been a really interesting point because I was joking with someone. I'm like, we're basically back a year. I'm not having to use AI like I was a year ago because the tools have degraded and the process isn't quite right. It's all complicated and the context and they're limiting here and there, etc. It's not ideal, but the mantra where AI is still super powerful and used the right way is there. So to give a very small, quick vignette, I've been working over the last few days where ultimately it's a bit of the evaluation engine where we've got lots of data. We then have lots of roles. They have to match off. Obviously, if over here, the rule is, like what's the brand of your car, and over here it needs to know what the brand of the car is. So it has to basically match off on the various data points potentially. Sometimes it's a list, all the usual stuff you would expect for rules matching engine type thing. What had happened over the last sort of month on some of the more complicated elements of data, because it might be sort of across policies or different sort of insurance terminologies, it created a very complicated thing where we go and eagerly calculate every possible combination across the sphere to then pull it together, which I knew it was doing because it was to get us over the line to get a release with an idea we to come back and refactor this. But then whenever I come back to refactor, having taken a few weeks off, and I now look at it, it's like that call stack has gone from like 3 or 4 layers of like get the data, get the rules, match them off, to like 30 or 40 where like it's doing, and it's a very AI centered problem where like it's doing checks and normalization every sub layer. So your call stack becomes like 12 deep because every of those three things has 4 sub call stacks and it all gets really complicated. So what I've done, which is where we're back to AI a year ago, or even a couple of years ago when I was a builder, is I'm now basically putting in the principle or like the coding pattern of how it works with the various contexts. And then what I'm doing on getting AI is going to look at the blast radius to basically conform the pattern I've given it with the rest of the code base. And I think it's one of those things where I don't know exactly, but my gut feeling on this is because the context windows are getting shortened, because that's the biggest cost of the tokens, and they're using bigger, more intelligent inference models, what you're getting is a lot of code slop and a lot of like, and I don't want to be too derogatory, but there's a lot of GitHub and Stack Overflow code examples where the actual inference engine itself learns from, which is not code I would be accepting from my engineers. And good coding projects to learn how to think about coding is quite minor. Whereas before, over the last 6 months roughly, because you were able to give so much context and so much guidance in exactly the patterns you want, and it could learn off your own code base rather than relying on the inference model itself, you were getting a much better standard of output on particularly greenfield, but existing code bases where you had very tight programming principles and patterns and paradigms. Whereas that's all really started to degrade now. And it's creating quite a challenging problem, because more so with the mentoring and guiding of junior staff, because basically where they could rely on AI a bit as part of the learning and guidance on the smaller tasks, not the big complicated stuff, I'm now having to go back and be like, I know I told you you can rely on AI, but you can't. And I'm having to spend a lot of time explaining to junior staff like why AI isn't working at the minute. And they're like, but it worked 2 months ago. Why doesn't it work now? And I'm like, well, it's kind of like cost suppression of tokens and it's kind of complicated. And I don't know because I don't work for Anthropic or Codex, but like it's kind of all of these dynamics. So just be careful because even though that looks right, it's terrible. It should look like this. So it's almost for the last month made my life more difficult rather than better. But I'm hopeful and optimistic that it will improve and come good again. But I think the bit that matters, and it's the being nice or being kind, is as a leader, not a manager, you have to call out these seismic shifts and changes and just own up to the responsibilities and whatever else. And I think this is a nice arc back to where we started on this sort of sphere to a certain extent, which is managers care about outcomes, leaders care about repeatable outcomes. And so the point is that if the tooling isn't working as a leader, we have to adjust the process and piece it together. We don't have to go into manager mode of, we expected these sprint points to be delivered by Friday. Just get that done because that's all that matters. Okay. It's a bit like leadership is on the infinite, whereas management's on the finite scale. And I think that's a big sort of mental model you have to bring together because we're in this for the long haul, not the short haul, basically.
Yeah. James?
Yes. I think we are sort of running out of time, but what I wanted to ask you to sort of get some final thoughts on is a lot of people have talked about, AI, the career of a software engineer is dead or they're not going to be needed in future, yet we're seeing probably higher demand than ever for software engineers. What would you tell someone who's perhaps a year or two into their engineering career? What advice would you give them as an engineer? What should they focus on and should they be worried?
Yes, I think I don't want this to be the answer, but I'm worried about it. So I think they should be worried. And I don't think that worry should be just blind fear. I think that worry should distill and focus them on what they can control in that space of anxiety, to be perfectly honest. I think they need to really focus, and my guidance for all the guys I work with is focus on like outcomes and product solutions rather than exactly the technology you're using and why. And the reason I say that is, and there's lots of terminology of like forward deployed engineer, product led engineer, stuff like that, where we get back to this paradigm where I think one of the biggest keys to success for me is not understanding technology really well. It's understanding the problem space from a first order, Elon Musk style first principles, and then supplementing that problem with a solution with technology effectively where possible.
Charlie Munger wants his framework back.
Yeah, right, exactly. I'm saying that because it came off. It came off
it's Charlie Munger. It's Charlie Munger, not Elon Musk. Elon Musk took it from Charlie Munger. But anyway, keep going. Sorry.
Yeah. So yeah, whoever it was, the first problem principle.
Yeah. It was probably Aristotle.
Exactly. That's what. Yeah. Exactly. So it's getting back to that point of like, it's sort of like the why are you here and what are you doing type thing. And I do wonder in a way if the last 20 years of why I hated technology was because it was just plugging big code bases together and technology. It's all really boring. Whereas now I feel like we're back into the 80s. Like I had circuit boards up on the weekend because you can create like a Tamagotchi from Anthropic to connect to Claude Code, and that seemed cool. And like, there's so many POCs I have running around the place. It's like mental technology, interesting sort of like 30-year-olds in garages, like it was in the 80s. It's just a cool place to be again. And so I think you have to be excited by it. And as a junior engineer or coming out of university, like you have to appreciate like this is the time of your life you'll look back on and be like, wow, that was incredible. And someone said to me once, when I was about 25 or 26, that like when they were at Citadel doing finding high frequency trading, he looks back at the best time of his life, and he said to me, it was one of the best pieces of advice I've ever been given is, if you find yourself in a good team at a good stage in your life and you're doing interesting work, really lean into that and take pictures and remember it because you'll love it. And my first build at the hedge fund was exactly that. It was 4 of us. We worked super hard. We partied super hard, and we like built the entire stack for the hedge fund. It was incredible. And right now, I would hope most people in most industries with the AI boom are in that sphere and should really, really love this. I speak to guys my age, 10 years older than me, and we're like, this is the time. Like, this is our 80s. Like, this is so cool and exciting. And when that drifts off, it's not going to be as cool and exciting. So I really want people to take that passion and like lean into it all, but also be very aware of where you are in your understanding. Like I've been building tech for 20-something years now, on, off, like front end, back end, all this different stuff. So when it comes to like what I'm trying to achieve, I have a reasonable grasp of what AI is suggesting to me, and I've managed people and I've managed software engineers, so I can manage AI in that same sort of sphere to a certain extent. And so junior engineers, I think, need to use it as a tool to learn and try and make lots and lots of mistakes, but not be too hung up on this is what you should do or this is what you shouldn't do, because the hard skills of an engineer are basically problem solving. Like that's what engineers have always done. So if you focus on your problem solving, your critical thinking, you will most likely be fine. But again, and as a sort of, I guess, the start of the conversation, there needs to be luck there, right? Like I end up in the right trading floor at the right time where I could rebuild a desk. I then got the phone call to the right hedge fund and I go and rebuild a hedge fund. I then got the call to join InsurX at the right time to rebuild their platform. So this is my 6th build now, because at each point in time, I'd either finished a build or was looking to move on or looking to go somewhere else, and someone could do a greenfield build. And so luck has been a massive, massive part of that. And at the same time, I guess there's a bit of a sort of a glide path the rest of my career now, where when you've got 6 builds at 37, people will hire you on and off to do other builds over the next 10 or 15 years because you've just done so many of them. And therefore, I would like to think this is the case, but I'm sort of humble enough to really not be, is that I've got a lot of experience from those 6 builds. So therefore, I'd like to think I'm better than someone doing their first build. But at the same time, there's an element where each build's different and has lots of different problems. So, that's not to say if you haven't done a build, you're in trouble, because I think the world is going to move around so fast and the problem statements we have are going to be so different that the only commonality is going to be change and the ability to solve problems firsthand.
That's good advice.
Yeah. On that note, I think we have to pull it in.
Thanks
There's a
for
lot
joining us.
I was waiting for an opportunity to do my normal promotion of functional programming and why functional programming is much better suited to coding agents than other languages, which will remain unnamed, like Python. But I'll leave that for a follow up podcast.
Thanks so much, Ben. There's a lot of interesting stuff there. I think people will enjoy that, and we'll put some notes in just so if anyone wants to find you on LinkedIn, they can. And we will have to get you on next time for some deeper dives in
deep dive on the tech.
Yeah. We'll build our AI or whatever.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, James.